there's still room for you. So people who want to get in because they see how enjoyable and fulfilling the UAS industry can be from the outside looking in, I'm the one who's here to say, absolutely. Not only is it as fun as it looks, there's a place for people who have interest in a potential aviation passion or data passion to come in and have an enriched career.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 333. Can small UAS businesses thrive in this changing industry? Today's guest has proven they can. Matt Dunlevy is president and founder of SkySkopes, an unmanned aircraft systems flight operations company based in Grand Forks, North Dakota. SkySkopes is a professional service provider with a highly qualified operations and geospatial team. They operate a wide variety of advanced sensors and aircraft for transmission and distribution line inspections, oil and gas applications, and many other innovative cases that focus on adding value. Matt founded SkySkopes in 2014 and secured the first FAA permission to fly UAS for business in North Dakota. Since then, he has successfully navigated the company's growth through the changes and evolution of the drone industry. A lifelong aviation enthusiast, Matt has taught numerous UAS courses at the University of North Dakota, such as UAS Business, UAS Engineering, and UAS Ethics. Matt was also one of my guests on the first year of the Drone Radio Show. At that time, the company was only about 1 year old and just starting to find its way in the energy sector. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Matt returns to talk about SkySkopes, how the company has grown over the past 7 years, and the lessons learned in creating a drone-based energy services company. But before we hear from Matt, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have a great story on the use of drones that you'd like to share in a podcast, contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's learn how a small drone-based business continues to thrive in the drone industry with Matt Dunlevy of SkySkopes. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Matt to introduce himself.
My name is Matt Dunlevy, and I'm the founder of and a partner at SkySkopes, which is a professional drone service provider bringing innovative solutions to the energy sector. But we're not just a drone service provider. We're really a platform agnostic data intelligence and solutions provider. It just so happens that we started with unmanned aircraft, and it really is at the core of what we do.
Matt, how long has SkySkopes been in business?
SkySkopes was incorporated in October of 2014, and I had actually been working on it for a little bit before it was incorporated because it was a spinoff of one of the classes that I was teaching at the University of North Dakota at the time.
And when you started the company, what was the primary focus?
When we started out, and our initial value statement was to fly unmanned aircraft systems at weddings to collect cinematography for the wedding party. And, we were thinking, okay, well, this is a good environment. People will be willing to, on their special day, go to great lengths to make sure that they can capture it and remember it forever. And drones had been a part of that, and we saw that nobody was doing it professionally. So, we jumped in on that. Originally, our business model was focused around cinematography. And as we branched out from weddings, just wedding photography, we wanted to shoot promotional videos for companies, do aerial marketing, It was great. We got ESPN to come in and have us do some cinematography for the Carson Wentz hero shoot when Carson Wentz, who was the quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think he's on the Colts now, but when he was getting drafted out of North Dakota, ESPN called us in to do some of the UAS cinematography. But we can't wait on companies like ESPN to give us a call every other day. That's just not sustainable. It's not repeatable. So that's why we got into the energy sector.
How did you transition from general cinematography into the energy sector?
I wouldn't say that there was a moment like the founding of SkySkopes that SkySkopes also pivoted from cinematography to energy. At that point, we would do anything that could give us revenue, and it wasn't totally clear that the repeatability of the missions that we could do in the energy sector were better than the missions in cinematography, where we can get higher margin, and sometimes they're less complex to execute. But I would say that it was also the appeal of the advanced technologies. So when people started talking about how at some point drones might be able to seep some of the potential energy off of the transmission lines that they're inspecting, and that can replace the need for a generator or a battery on the aircraft, and these birds could just stay in the air forever as long as they're near a transmission line. You know, when we started thinking about that and seeing some of the different types of imaging systems that would be put into the platforms and how they're just far more interesting and sophisticated than just a normal electro-optical sensor like a Panasonic or a Sony. Don't get me wrong, they have their merits too and their virtues in cinematography and other missions that are repeatable and scalable as in the energy sector. But when we started seeing the LiDAR sensors and the possibilities started dawning on us of where contrast could be found and what the missions would be like once we have this LiDAR, it really percolated. I'd say we drifted and then it just kind of came over us that, yeah, we really need to focus on the energy sector, particularly utilities and in oil and gas.
Early on, what type of services did you provide to energy companies?
Well, there were some research missions that were kind of pioneer projects, so to speak, that the utilities would call on us for. And we would try to go out and have some sort of a very complex mission that might be unique just to this particular utility. Or there were some wildfire mitigation missions. There were some disaster relief missions. A lot of them were centered around the utility world. And, you know, everyone needs to keep the lights on. So it was a moral mission. And everybody knows that utilities have been around for a while. They're not going anywhere. And so in many respects, they're deep pocketed and can sustain UAS operations. So when we saw this trend, you know, we wanted to see what were the things that we wouldn't have to necessarily depend on them to come to us for, such as in a disaster. You know, we don't know when that's going to happen, or when they figure out some sort of a mission that might be a one-off that we'll, of course, go for, but isn't going to, you know, we're not going to get another knock on our door for. So when we started looking at wildfire mitigation, when we started looking at the routine inspections for what could also be routine maintenance and taking photos of the insulators and then making sure that the lines don't have the, I would say, incorrect or just what's out of their regulatory standards, you know, they've got to be in compliance. You know, seeing some of the things in their assets and getting situational awareness of their assets were things that we could zero in on, were things that we could show new capabilities to these utilities for, because that's not what they're constantly looking at. And we could essentially kind of get a little bit more control in that value stream. So imagery of the assets themselves were really where we wanted to start, but we could take whatever we would get.
And obviously, it was a good decision to focus on the energy sector.
Yeah, and not just pivoting to energy, but once we're in energy, making sure that we're able to pivot the way in which we collect the data. So with new different types of sensors and new different types of methodologies, such as flying beyond visual line of sight and flying with different agnostic style vehicles. That's aerial, ground-based, and unmanned aerial versus the manned aerial vehicles. So, and there's probably going to be further pivots then too. So when we start talking about the data backend, you don't know when you're going to have to add a new software or completely change what software you're using because some new algorithm or artificial intelligence could come out. And actually, that was another reason why, to go back to your previous question there, Randy, why we wanted to start with some of these scientific missions where they were repeatable and scalable. Usually those were also the ones that could get into the artificial intelligence, and that was clear to us early too.
What have been some of the challenges that SkySkope faced over the past 7 years?
I saw a lot of different market forces affect our industry, and similarly to that, there have been lessons in this industry that you can take to others. Some of my favorite examples of the UAS industry being affected are, like the term race to the bottom, wherein the regulations, like they were in other industries or markets, drive prices down, and whoever could essentially deal with it would stay in business. So you've got the race to the bottom with UAS prices as well. And, just lessons that I've learned, I would say, in the UAS industry that can apply to other industries. Well, first off, just it being aviation. A lot of what we've learned in aviation can apply into the manned aviation world. UAS, even though safety is first, we've learned a lot about business in general, and we can apply the same principles of finance and keeping books and things like that to other companies that if they're dealing with UAS. A big one is going to be the depreciation of drones and how drones depreciate, how to make sure everybody keeps their ethical edge up. And what are the technical things that I've learned that can apply elsewhere? I would say specifically just from the number of reps that we've done with flights and how a company can avoid some of the pitfalls that we've gone through, making sure they've got all of their I's dotted and T's crossed, paperwork, checklists, everything before they go and execute a mission, making sure that they choose the right bird if they're going to be standing up a program, things like that. And then also the importance of networking.
And for you personally, you're now offering UAS consulting services. What needs of other companies do you think you'd really be able to help?
Well, marketing is a big one, making sure that people are able to brand their company, making sure that they're getting the name out, getting their message out, and really making an imprint in the conscience of their target audience and their customer base. And that's something that I haven't necessarily seen a lot of UAS service providers do successfully. That's also, I guess, somewhat forgivable because a true DSP is really focused on safety over business, right? So if they're focused on safety, maybe they're not spending as much bandwidth on the marketing. And having a happy equilibrium, I think, like what SkySkopes has, is definitely a good way to go out and make a good impression on their customers. So there's that. Making the connections is also pretty important. Bringing connections that I already have and then also helping them make new connections is another thing that I think the UAS industry itself can use more of.
What stands out to you most when you look at the evolution of the drone industry over the past 10 years?
I want to say that the birth of the industry commercially was back in the late 2010s before it gets into too far into the teens. Somewhere between 2013 and 2014, I would say that there were some real industry movement on the 333 exemption component of the industry. So when exemptions start coming out in 2013, 2014, huge milestone. And then 2015, 2016 with Part 107, huge milestone. I would say that there are non-regulatory milestones as well. I would have to say that the advent of the DJI Phantom being the first household name, quote unquote, aircraft that is mass producible and reliable in the air and actually does something while it's in the air as far as gathering some data and really lowering the skill requirement for a user. I would say that the Phantom was somewhat of a milestone for the industry. Then you've got the advanced permissions. So some of these BVLOS waivers, like what you're seeing in North Dakota and some other places too, that test site in Virginia is pretty impressive what they've got going on. The test site system itself, I guess you could say, was a milestone. And also the advent of the IPP moving into the Beyond program, huge milestones there. The advent of the DAC, you could say, was also kind of a milestone. It's funny how the industry is really affected by the FAA, and also how the industry was affected. Going back to just lessons learned, like I was talking about how the race to the bottom, you can also think about the macroeconomic effects, how COVID has affected other industries. COVID has definitely also affected the UAS industries, the UAS industry and the industries within it. Sometimes in a positive way, sometimes not so. But you can definitely see that it was a milestone, not regulatory, not technological, not self-imposed either. So you would have to say that COVID was a milestone in the UAS industry.
You mentioned earlier that SkySkopes came out of a class project. Can you tell us about that?
Before I started SkySkopes, I was teaching at the University of North Dakota in the College of Business. And the class was called New Venture Initiation. And it actually attracted students from all different walks of life and different disciplines from other colleges and schools and departments across campus. So the capstone of the class was to put together a mock business plan presentation to a hypothetical board of investors. And many of these students hadn't done this before, so they wanted an example that would have been true to form. So ever a teacher wanting to make his students happy, I was asked to give a presentation sample of what I was expecting so they could see where the bar was set. So I said yes in the class and had to bring it back to them at the next class period and said, okay, so this is the presentation that I'm kind of wanting you to see. And when I was thinking about what business to present to them, thought, okay, well, what is in Grand Forks that we have that would make a good business that no one else is doing? And I saw that the UAS ecosystem had been so developed, but at the same moment that 333s had come out, no one in Grand Forks, which is maybe the epicenter of drones globally or nationwide, and no one else in Grand Forks is using UAS for commercial purposes. So I put together a pitch deck of what a company would look like there, and I actually convinced myself that this couldn't just be left in academia, and decided to literally run with it. And that was the advent of SkySkopes.
Your roots are in the cinematography area. So I'm curious, would you take a cinematography job today?
I mean, it really depends. It depends if the juice is worth the squeeze. So if it's a one-off mission and we have extra pilots and it's near where they are with the equipment that they have, oftentimes we would say yes. But, really as we focus on the scalability, we try to do that less and less.
And if I remember correctly, you do quite a bit of work in the western part of the state.
Correct. So North Dakota is the state that produces the most oil per day in barrels, with the exception of Texas. So we're number 2 in the country. And we have a huge oil play out on the western side of the state in the Bakken shale formation. And there's a lot of interest from the oil companies to fly their pipelines, their right-of-ways, their well pads, pump jacks, flare stacks, everything. UAS are a safe and efficient and interesting and fun way to make sure that they're able to keep a better eye on all of their equipment. So it was coincidental that we're, kind of at the intersection of 2 big industries, being oil and drones, when we're in North Dakota.
There's also a BVLOS test corridor in the area. Do you know anything about it?
Well, the Northern Plains UAS test site, and, I cannot speak highly enough of the team that they've got over there, is also working on something called VANTIS. And VANTIS is the statewide beyond visual line of sight network, where we're putting a whole bunch of new radars in the ground while also using some of the more old high-powered radars that, say, Air Force bases have, and putting radios on some of the aircraft. These are very advanced radios with the systems integrators that go onto the aircraft, and we can then make a justification in North Dakota, probably before anywhere else, that the FAA should allow us to fly drones beyond visual line of sight, because we can keep them out of the way of other manned aircraft and we can fly safely. I mean, it's going to be extremely important to get those radars out in Williston, North Dakota, or in Watford City or Dickinson, North Dakota, where we've got a lot of the oil assets. So that's where they've chosen to start. And we've seen a lot of interest from many of the majors and the super majors that have a presence out in Western North Dakota.
Matt, what advice would you give to others in the industry?
In the UAS industry, my cornerstone statement has always been, there's still room for you. So people who want to get in because they see how enjoyable and fulfilling the UAS industry can be from the outside looking in, I'm the one who's here to say, absolutely. Not only is it as fun as it looks, there's a place for people who have interest in a potential aviation passion or data passion to come in and have an enriched career. So UAS is absolutely fantastic in that regard. As far as people who are already in the industry, I'd say, stay the course. And we've just all been waiting for BVLOS. That's going to be the next major milestone for our industry, probably even also for the company. We've been using helicopters for some of the data collection because we carry heavier sensors and we've got the software to use it. And we already understand the value of being able to fly linear infrastructure for extended periods of time. But beyond visual line of sight can supplement that and would still be a huge milestone for the industry and for a company like ours. So as far as advice goes, stick it out for that and really focus on a niche area that can make you special and that you can really be distinctive in.
When do you think we'll see general BVLOS operations?
I will give you the standard answer that I've always heard is next year. Whenever I've ever asked anyone else, how long do you think before we get BVLOS? It's always the standard answer of 1 year. And looking back at some of the people who've been in the industry longer than I have, that's what they said about the 333 and the aviation rulemaking committee that was put together to see the framework. And then the NPRM comes out for the rule. And then the rule goes into effect. And then you get a new version of the rule where everyone's applying for amendments and they're getting them. People were saying that 333 was going to be a year down the road and then a year down the road, but eventually it did come. And eventually BVLOS will also get established and in a blanket fashion or in a scalable fashion. And at that point, I think it'll be a very pivotal moment for the drone industry and one that'll make a lot of people who are in the industry for a long time happy.
Matt, from your perspective, how would you characterize the last 7 years in the drone industry?
Oh, storybook. It's a cliche in the industry that I can't appreciate. And just looking back at the time, one thing I know is that no 2 days were the same. And I can appreciate that too. So there's always some new exciting technology or some what I consider to be good things. If you consider a problem to be an opportunity, you get new opportunities every day. And I would say that something you can also put your heart into. So it's unique, it's interesting, and something that's easy to be passionate about, this industry.
And for my final question, Matt, what message would you like to leave regarding the future of the drone industry?
The future is bright for both bigs and smalls. And it's always right around the corner, but at least we're really testing for BVLOS now. So the best fact is that there is a future, and it's pretty obvious that it is going to be bright, and that we'll probably look back on days like this where we don't have BVLOS as almost prehistoric, but there still are valuable and profitable ways in which to participate in the UAS industry and to really be a core component of it.
That's it for episode 333 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Matt Dunlevy of SkySkopes. I want to thank Matt for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about SkySkopes or want to connect with Matt, check out the webpage at skyscopes.com. And Scopes is spelled Skopes. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.